Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance. The CFO role is changing rapidly, moving from cost controller to strategic visionary. And with every change comes opportunity. We are here to help you take advantage of this transition, to win at work, drive your career forwards, and lead with confidence. Join Hannah Munro, Managing Director of ITAS, a financial transformation consultancy, as she interviews key experts to give you real-world advice and guidance on how to transform your processes, people, and data. Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. A blast from the past today. I'm very excited to say and welcome back onto the show Susana Serrano-Davey, who, for those of you that have been long-time listeners, will remember a fabulous podcast we did a very long time ago, it seems, back when the podcast was very new. But I'm very excited to have her back on the show. Welcome, Susana.
Thank you, Hannah. Lovely to be back.
And obviously, one of the occasions for you coming back is obviously your recently released book, which we're going to talk about today. But also, I think for those that perhaps don't know you, maybe it's worth us giving a bit of a brief. Obviously, you're a Grow CFO mentor, but tell us a little bit about your past, your journey, and how you ended up working with the Grow CFO team and writing your new book.
Wow, it's a lot of questions in one. So I'll give you a very high-level overview. So I am originally Spanish, but I went to England when I was 21. So I spent most of my adult life in the UK working there and also internationally. And I've had a long and colorful career in finance. I worked in practice first, then I set up my own business and sold it. Then I moved and worked in finance in multinational organizations. And 4 years ago, when I was at the peak of my career, that having achieved all those things many people listening today will be aiming for, I just found myself at a place in life that I thought, it's time to do something else. And that was prompted by a health problem, but I'm okay now, which is great. But it was really a chance to think about, what do I want to do with the rest of my career? So since then, 5 years ago, I have done additional training, and I slowly moved to spend my experience not in the busy office, but sharing my learnings in a number of ways. So I do collaborate with Grow CFO, so I'm one of the mentors there, also with the Institute of Chartered Accountants. I facilitate a number of modules in a leadership program. I have published 2 books, and that keeps me very excited because I'm constantly supporting people that are where I have been. And it's really nice to be able to use my experience in that different way.
Well, and there's a lot to unpick there in terms of what you've done. But I wanted to use this podcast as an opportunity to talk about those soft skills that we all know we need, but perhaps we don't discuss enough. And certainly on this podcast, we've done a lot recently around stories and people's backgrounds, and a lot about how do you build knowledge in a particular functional capability. Mm-hmm. But what I'm very excited to talk to you about today, Susana, is almost taking a step back and looking at us as individuals and what are some of the key skills that we need to develop as CFOs, senior finance leaders, to ensure that we are a success in our roles. So it'd be lovely to get your insight and your thoughts.
I think, as you mentioned, I think sometimes we focus so much on the technical capability that we forget that actually the softer skills are, I would dare say, as important, and at certain levels, if not more. Because early on in our career, clearly is all about the to-do list, and it's all about accuracy and getting the job done in well. But as you progress and become a leader, really, the technical ability is there to guide us. But what we spend most of our time doing is guiding other people, asking difficult questions, motivating people, making sure we're almost like project leaders rather than technical heads. And therefore, I think the list of soft skills needed is massive. I mean, one of the things I think is particularly important is self-awareness. And we develop that through life in a number of ways. But the other one as well, which I'm going to contradict myself here, is confidence, because this is a topic I've spent a lot of time working on in the last year. And I myself was told once when I was a financial controller, oh, Susana, to be a CFO, you need to have more confidence. And at that point, I was absolutely gobsmacked, because I thought, am I confident? I genuinely thought I was. Not all the time, but I thought I was confident enough. And clearly there were things, or there were signs that I was giving away to the world outside that led them to think that perhaps I wasn't confident enough. So I suppose today, the one I would put at the top of that list is not confidence in terms of you need to be confident, but actually being able to support yourself when you're not feeling confident. Because in my experience, that's what we all face. And we often talk about imposter syndrome in the workplace. When I work with people on a mentoring capacity on a one-to-one basis, improving their confidence is one of the top things on the list of aims at the beginning of a mentoring process. And in my own journey, I've learned to realize that, of course, it's lovely to be confident sometimes. It's great. But the reality is that we're not always going to feel confident for a number of reasons, because we may not have the right skill set yet. We may not have the experience. We may be having a bad day. We might be feeling blue, a whole lot of reasons why we may not feel confident. And therefore, I think is our ability to accompany ourselves in that journey that marks the difference. Because when we're able to almost be our best friend on that journey and support ourselves, rather than go there with a whip to say, oh, you should know better. Oh, you're going to be found out. Oh, what a stupid thing you said. I'm sure you can appreciate that the outcomes will be very different on your experience.
And there's an interesting comment there, actually, when you got given that feedback, that you weren't even aware that you weren't confident. That was a surprise to you. What are some of the things that we may be doing in our workplace that give off a lack of confidence?
Yes.
That we perhaps aren't aware of? What are some of the things that we need to be looking out for?
That is a very good question, actually, Hannah, because I like to think that we all have three characters within us. And I have given them names. So I have my super Susana that feels, oh, I'm going to get this done. I'm the bee's knees. I can do this. I have my mini Susana, which is when I'm thinking, oh, I'm really not sure how to do this. It's not good enough. I'm unsure. And I have my neutral Susana, which is the sensible one, a little bit like Lisa Simpson in The Simpsons. It's the sensible head around everybody else who is not very, very emotionally intelligent. And I think the first step is to acknowledge what is our usual role that we take. Because our personality, of course, has a lot to do with this. And we all have a natural style. Some of us are particularly we're naturally more optimistic about everything, and others we're more pessimistic. So first is identify what's your natural self. So in your case, Hannah, what do you think is your natural self? Your mini Hannah, your super Hannah, or your neutral Hannah? Who do you identify most with?
I've been given feedback that I'm normally the positive person in the room. So I would say I'm probably super. I'm always looking for the opportunity in a conversation.
Excellent. So once you've identified that you're usually that hyper or that super Hannah, start to listen for when you're not in that position, because there will be days when something goes wrong, perhaps like with a technical problem just before you have a podcast or whatever it is, you don't feel like that. And once you identified, or you start to observe your different personas, you can listen to how it is you speak to yourself, or how you speak to others about yourself. So quite often when I meet somebody for the first time in a mentoring capacity, one of the first things I pick up on is when they'll say, only last week, one of my mentees said, "Oh, I'm very clever, but I have no common sense whatsoever." And I picked her up on that at the end of the session. And I said, "Well, it's interesting that you said that you have no common sense whatsoever." And she stopped for a moment because, of course, she didn't do that consciously. We do these things without being aware of it. And in the end, the conversation led to, she almost does that as a way to, because it might be rude to say I'm clever. She offsets it with the, I have no common sense whatsoever. And the point I'm trying to make here is that by listening to your language and how you speak to others about yourself, whether that might be because you apologize before giving your opinion, or because you might put yourself down, like this example I've just given you, or because how you're feeling, because it might be that you're feeling nervous. I remember once I had an interaction with someone, and I gave her some well-intended feedback through one of the workshops that I ran. And immediately she went from looking at the camera and being quite settled to being very fidgety with her hands, looking down, not being able to look up. So these signs, whether it is about what we say or how we move, are those signs that you may be giving away without realizing that others notice, going back to your question.
And if we flip that on its head, is there a point where overconfidence is as detrimental as underconfidence?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think I've thought about these, and I remember having quite an interesting discussion with someone, because I made a joke, even though we're not supposed to make jokes sometimes. And I said, well, Donald Trump obviously doesn't have a confidence problem because he has all the confidence in the world. And this person quite rightly challenged me and said, yes, but Susana, perhaps those who appear the most confident and overact on their confidence may be precisely those that deep down within may feel a lack of certain ways. So I totally agree. I think overconfidence can be a barrier to ourselves, because if you don't have humility, how can we progress and get better at things? I think, but I genuinely don't think anyone feels 100% confident. I just haven't come across that before. Even if we may appear confident on the outside, people often tell me I appear confident, and I am a lot of the time, but not really, not as much as people think. But I feel accepting of not being confident all the time, and not being in control of things all the time, or not having to get my own way all the time. And going back to the workplace and our journeys to CFO, I think one of the things we can do is stop trying to be right all the time, and stop thinking that we need to have all the answers. Again, this is a conversation I often have with people when we're mentoring, because if someone gets perhaps blocked or a little bit nervous at a meeting because they feel they just don't have the answer at hand. When you observe great leaders, they don't have all the answers at hand all the time. You need to be okay with saying, you know what, that question is a good question, but I need time to think about that to give you a good answer. Or I need to reach out to someone to get more information about it, rather than trying to feel that you need the answer on the spot there and then.
Yes, and I think, I'm sure this came up in a recent conversation I was having about board meetings, because there is, we were talking about one of the dangers is if you react in a moment to a question, you either may give the wrong answer or may not give the answer in the right context, and then you've got a whole piece to undo. So
Yes.
almost that reaction to not feeling confident can sometimes be to try and give an answer even when it's not correct. One of the hardest things, I think, is actually putting into words what it means to work with myself and the team here at ITAS. Because not only are we a financial transformation consultancy, but we do it using Sage technology. So rather than me tell you how awesome we are, let me introduce one of our customers.
I'd recommend ITAS as a Sage partner, not only because of their knowledge that they have on the product itself, intact, but also their friendly and professional approach to the whole project. They've been incredibly flexible throughout the process, but also challenging us as a customer to really think about what it is that we're after, and ensuring that intact was actually the correct solution for us to meet our needs, which was really refreshing, rather than feeling we're just being sold a product that they offer. We've got on really well with the whole team. They've been hugely approachable, helpful throughout the whole process, really putting it as at ease if anything we kind of felt we were struggling with or difficult. It really helped us to understand some of the complexities with the new system that's different to other finance systems, things that we just never come across before, like the new dimensions and understanding how that actually works.
So with that then, how do you control that fear of not knowing the answer? Because I do feel like this is something, a trait that perhaps is maybe more common in CFOs, because there is a perception of the CFO role that they are all-knowing and they have the answer when it comes to numbers. They have the answers to everything, right? So how do you handle your own emotions and abilities when you're in that situation of being asked a question, perhaps that you don't know the answer to?
I think your question might be also applicable to whenever you put on the spot, and not necessarily on not having an answer. Because first of all, I think we need to be able to be in tune enough with our body to recognize when we are triggering a stress response. And that may come because somebody asks you an awkward question, or because you don't have the answer, or for whatever reason. So, and I over time, thankfully, now that I'm getting older, I'm incredibly good at spotting my stress responses. But I wasn't this good at it 10, 20 years ago. So first of all is listen to your body and spot when you're going into stress mode, because when you are going into stress mode, we're not at our best. We can't think, quite bluntly and quite honestly. You may have the answer to the question, but if you are under stressed, you can't find it, you can't grab it. So if you first recognize, right, I'm getting worked up about this, and stop and breathe and take the opportunity to rebalance your physical part, you may well find that actually that question you couldn't find an answer to is becoming clearer with time. So it's almost like give yourself what do you call it, like first aid to allow yourself to think clearly, because what happens is when we're stressed, we just don't think clearly, and therefore we get into this vicious circle of not being able to respond, or feeling that we can't respond appropriately because we're caught in that vicious circle. And if once you're not in a stress mode and you are more calm and you've had time to think, you still don't have the answer, I think it's much better to come clean about it than to try and bluff. It is very interesting, actually. One of the workshops that I run for Growth CFO is called the Virtual Boardroom, which is a session highly popular, very daunting for people, but at the same time enjoyable. And what we do there is we do role plays on a given scenario within a case study. And therefore, sometimes I will ask questions that people don't have the answer to. And it's so interesting when the natural behavior comes out, and some people will just bluff their way through and they start digging and digging and digging. Whereas other people will say, actually, I don't know, I have to get back to you on that. Or when you put pressure on them the typical one is to say, when am I going to have this work done by? If we don't know, it's better to say, I don't know, than to give an answer of say in 2 weeks and then not deliver. And this happens in real life, in real board scenarios and in real ordinary meetings. So again, I'd encourage our listeners to think, just to observe themselves and think, what do I do naturally when I'm pushed under stress? Do I give in? Do I tell the other person what they want to hear? Or do I give myself time to think? What's my natural behavior? Because once you understand what's your natural behavior is when you can start to make the free choice to do something that you think is more appropriate instead of whatever your natural behavior is.
Now, you mentioned recognizing that stress level is something you've developed over the years. What are some of the signs that we can watch out for to understand whether we're hitting that stress mode?
Physically, very easy. Your breathing changes. When you are relaxed, talking to me right now, I'm sure you're breathing quite happily. And when you become stressed, your breath shortens. And also your body. In my case, I feel my tension right here behind my shoulders and my upper shoulders. So if I'm getting under stress, and sometimes it might be, I don't know, that I'm cooking and somebody rings a doorbell, or it doesn't, these stress things happen everywhere in life. So it doesn't have to be just in the workplace, or if you're running late to catch a bus or the train. Just observe your physical sensation. What do you think would be your own physical sensations, Hannah, physically when you are a little bit worked up?
Do you know what? I don't know. So this is a great question for me personally.
Your hands might get a bit shaky. I get shaky when I'm nervous.
I would say, well, if I'm riding my horse when I get stressed or I get scared, I do hold my breath. So
Yes.
that's why, so I know that when I'm riding a horse. I'm not so sure what it is in the workplace though. So that's really interesting.
Perhaps some people, they get sweaty palms, or
Mm-hmm.
they'll get a flashy face, they'll get red-faced.
Yes.
We all have different symptoms, but I think it's very powerful to actually recognize what's your personal symptom, because now I'm brilliant at not letting things escalate, because I spot it immediately when I'm getting worked up. And it might be over something really silly, it doesn't have to be something serious. I spot it quickly. And when I do, I just go, right, step back, rebalance, and become, accompany yourself rather than get caught up in that circle. It's like when you can, I don't know, have you ever lost your keys and you start?
Oh, frequently. I am shocking for losing.
Well, that's a good example for you. So I'd
Okay.
say in your case, when next time you lose your keys, just instead of continuing to look for them frantically, just take a pause and just stop for 30 seconds. Just stop and breathe. And then think, right, when did I last see my keys?
Mm.
And you will recover that situation far quicker than if you go, where are the keys? Where are the keys? Where are the keys? And we've all been there looking for keys for half an hour.
We have.
So that's a good exercise for you. Just test yourself in those moments. And ultimately, I think it is about becoming almost like our own private coach and mentor. You don't need to have someone like me all the time. You can do it yourself with the right training.
And so one of the things we've talked about is when you're maybe feeling confident and feeling under pressure, to recognize firstly when you are, what's the next step? So how do you sort of manage that situation and give yourself the space, particularly when somebody's trying to put you under pressure?
I call it, I've given it a name, my little strategy. It's very cheesy, by the way. It's called spot and stop. So spotting is the first step. You spot your behavior. We all have unhelpful behaviors. I can give you lots of examples of, training sessions that I've done that people have realized in those training sessions what might be their behaviors. And then stop them. Once you spot them, you can observe yourself in the workplace and bite your lip. So, for instance, if you have a tendency to apologize before you give your opinion, once you've spotted it, you will continue to say it, but then you'll catch yourself and you will cringe. And over time, instead of apologizing every time you say you state your opinion, you will stop doing it. And that will also make you start to give yourself more credit and think, perhaps, yeah, I do have something sensible, that my opinion does count for something. And it's almost like not only are you not giving out those signs to the world, but you're also supporting yourself and giving yourself the right messages. So it's as simple as that. And a very good example, very easy example to spot, and I often use when we talk about communication, which is another key skill for anyone really in life, let alone the journey to CFO, is communication skills. And something that we all tend to do is have, and you as a podcaster will know, filler words, the arms and the ahs and the you knows and the so. Those words are noise, that they don't add value to our communication. So in the same way, the way to fix your filler words would be just spot the ones you use commonly, and you can record yourself, you can just observe yourself, you can ask other people to tell you. And once you know which ones they are, over time remove them. I'm sure you've tried yourself to remove perhaps a filler word from your common vocabulary, Hannah, as a podcaster.
Well, I now have a rule that I can't listen back to myself, Susana, because there is nothing worse than listening to yourself for an hour. So, but yes, when I first started, there was a few words that I had to consciously not say when I was in a podcast.
And I know how cringy it is to listen to yourself, but I recommend to everyone listening to this podcast, if you are able, and I do encourage you to do so, just record a couple of meetings and listen to yourself, not with a critical, oh my God, Hannah, that is terrible. How could you do that? But almost as a friend, and think, right, when are you perhaps putting yourself down? When are you hesitating? What are the things you're doing to not support yourself? Almost like if you're watching a tape for your daughter or son or sister or brother, somebody who you love, you will spot those behaviors and those things that you use in your language that are putting yourself down.
And we mentioned earlier that sometimes a lack of confidence can manifest itself as being overconfident.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what are some of the signs when you're listening back to that call that you maybe have gone into overdrive and gone the other way and are coming across maybe taking charge when you should be stepping back and allowing others to speak? So what are some of the things that you can look for to make sure you have the balance right in your conversations with your team and with colleagues?
That is a very good question. And actually, I don't think it's just a matter of confidence, but it's a matter of effective influencing and relating to other people. And to me, one skill that I certainly wasn't very good at earlier on, and I'm still working at, is active listening. The importance of active listening is key. If you do this all the time with the job that you do on this podcast, because to be able to ask meaningful questions to your guests, you really need to pay attention to what I'm saying. And you're very well trained on that. But I think the average leader, we're rubbish. Because we feel we have to be the ones that effectively are speaking all the time. And also because we haven't really paid attention to training ourselves to listen more. And this is something I often work with people that I support, because you need to let your team, for instance, if you want to have a meeting, let's say an example, you have a meeting with your team member, and you want them to open up and tell you about how they're feeling, and tell you about their aspirations for the role, tell you about what they think. So a typical development conversation. If you are only directing, they're going to be almost like cornered into a little corner at the back, think, I better not say anything in case I say something wrong. Instead of telling them what you think, there's nothing better that you can do than ask them what they think. So by asking other people and listening to what they have to say, of course you can then have your say, but with the right context, rather than being almost like an elephant in a china shop, always running the show. Or ask yourself in team meetings, am I always the one who speaks, or am I allowing and asking my team leaders themselves to perhaps lead on a particular section of the agenda? Or am I tired of listening to myself? Would be the key question that I would ask myself, I think, to check for that one.
And you, obviously you mentioned starting certainly one-to-ones and team engagements with questions, but have you got any other tips and thoughts on how we can improve our active listening skills?
I think that first of all, also giving yourself time to think. So what you've just done there, you've asked me a question, and I've just paused for a moment to replay your question in my mind so I could then answer it appropriately. So the second tip, I guess, might be just slow down. Because when we ask a question, we have almost like a trigger response that is very fast, but it's not always the right answer to that question. And if anyone has experiences of job interviews, I'm sure you will have observed that quite often you ask a question to the interviewee and they're not responding to your question. They're just telling you something. And therefore, I think that's something to watch out for active listening. Take time, really understand, and then respond, not just go with the flow.
So I'd like to circle back to something that we talked about at the beginning, right? And you mentioned your story of being given feedback early on in your career that said, you need to be more confident. If you're given that feedback, how can you build your confidence, or perhaps how can you build your appearance of confidence with your...
Hannah, you're treading on muddy waters here. I have just written a book called Confidence is Overrated, and I can see why you've gone into that position, but I think this is exactly what we don't have to do. And what I mean is, you cannot force feeling confident. That is not something you can force. That is not something you can manufacture. What you can do is create the right circumstances to almost promote that growth. It's almost, imagine you have a little plant. You want to have some beautiful, I don't know, some beautiful roses. They're notoriously difficult to grow roses. You can't guarantee you'll have a healthy, beautiful rose at the end of the season. But what you can do is you can get the right soil, you can choose the right spot in your garden, you can water it at the right time, and so on. So first of all, forget about trying to be confident forcefully. It's just not going to happen. And the other thing is, I don't believe it's a good piece of advice to tell people to leave fake it. I don't believe in the fake it until you make it. I think that is terrible, because isn't that exactly what feeds the imposter syndrome? when you're telling people you need to just give out the right impression. No, it's not about what you give out, it's about how you feel. And when you start treating yourself nicely, you start to feel perhaps not confident, but you do feel you are capable of supporting yourself through whatever the scenario. I have gone in my life, I'm sure I have had lots of successes, but a lot of failures, a lot of difficult moments. And I talk about a lot of them on my book. I've given out the worst stories are in there, because my point here is, it's not about succeeding and feeling confident all the time. It's about acknowledging and integrating those failures in a way that they make you stronger. Because I know whatever happens to me, I genuinely know this deep in my heart, I'll be okay. and I can support myself through that, even if difficult, even if it's not the right outcome, even if it's not what I expected. So my invitation to people thinking about this topic is precisely the opposite of what you asked, is forget confidence and live your life. Because if you support yourself in the right way, you will have a lot of successes too. You will enjoy your journey. And yes, every once in a while, you won't be good enough, but that's okay too. It's about living and just growing. Sometimes people will ask me, oh, if I don't get it, if I don't become the CFO, if I don't get that role, I will have failed. And I think, really? Will you really? I have done many things in my life and career that I never expected. Like now, I publish books on different things. And when I was at the top of my CFO career, I couldn't possibly imagine myself doing creative work. And therefore, I wouldn't recommend that people try and pretend to be confident, because I think that is a seed for feeling even worse about yourself.
So if the trick is not to fake it till you make it, which I think is, like you said, the most common advice, how can you build that quiet confidence? What do you need to change in how you treat yourself, how you speak to yourself, and how you allow others to speak to you so that you can develop that self-confidence?
So I think there are, as I said, there are things you can do. So for example, one thing that I think is key is finding your voice. Quite often, if you really pay attention to how you interact with others, especially at work, especially with senior people, we are biting our lip all the time. We're not expressing our needs. We're not expressing our opinions. We are almost like hiding away our needs. And if we're not putting our needs first, we are undermining ourselves and we're undermining our confidence. So finding a way or different ways to communicate what we really feel, what we really want, what we really think, it's a really good way to build your confidence, even if you don't get your own way, even if people don't agree with you. Just being able to express yourself feels good. It's almost like, I don't know if you've ever had this situation. I'll give you a silly example of home life. I tend to do the washing up at home, and I don't mind. My husband likes to wait a few hours before washing up the dishes, and I like to wash them up immediately after eating. But every once in a while, I get tired of doing that. And instead of waiting and biting my lip and one day going, right, I've had enough, I'm fed up, you never wash up, because that would be the usual style. And we do this at work, by the way, as well, because what we do, we don't express ourselves, and then one day we're demotivated and we resign. So instead of doing that, when I notice, and going back to that physical sensation earlier, when I know that one day I'm not happily washing up the dishes, I say, darling, I'll let you wash up the dishes today. Can you see? And I find my voice in that situation, rather than bottling, and then one day going pop and breaking.
And if I just think about that in the context you shared that, so I can't remember who told it to me, but one of the lessons that I was taught about having a good, healthy relationship is absolutely to speak up, but also to pick the things that actually mean something to speak up about.
Yes.
So finding that balance between having the conversation about who's doing the dishes, and we'll use that as an example, versus if you're not bothered about doing it, or it's it's only happened once, not necessarily saying everything that's on your mind, right? So
absolutely.
So what's your view on finding the balance between having a voice and speaking up to make your voice heard versus picking the things that you want to be heard? So great to get your perspective.
The important battles. I think this is like with children, you can't tell them off for everything. Otherwise, you'd be a terrible parent. And it's the same with picking your battles. You need to say, right, quite often when I'm working with people, we will be discussing and going into detail into their relationship with their line manager. And I think we talked about this a little bit when we spoke last time together. And it's very common for people not to be assertive with their line managers about certain things. And quite often in the CFO scenarios, and I'm sure people listening to this will be nodding when I continue speaking. Quite often you arrive in your brand new CFO job or senior finance role, and your line manager will say, I need you to change the ERP system. I want you to get a better reporting. I need you to do this. But by the way, there's no additional funding. So they expect us to come along with the same resources as our predecessor, with similar technical background, and deliver miracles. And I've seen this film a few times, and it happens over again. And over time, you can't implement a ERP system appropriately, or the reporting is not good enough, and you end up either being fired. A lot of senior people get fired all the time, or you're absolutely fed up and give up the job because you can't take it any longer. And in my view, that is because we don't call a spade a spade. It's like the example I like to give on this is, you imagine you're a chef and you're hired because you make the best chicken soup. And the first day you arrive at that posh restaurant you've been hired, they say, oh, I want you to make that chicken soup that you're so famous for. Go to the fridge. We're a bit tight on budget, so there's nice carrots in there. You'll do your best, I'm sure. If you were a chef, would you be able to make your chicken soup with just the carrots in the fridge? No. And we're the same. And therefore, our ability in terms of picking the right battles to be able to have a conversation, an assertive conversation with your senior leader and say, I can't make chicken soup with carrots. I don't know how you can explain it to them. But just going along with it and saying yes to everything and waiting for the clock to continue to tick so that you fail, I don't think is an option. So I think in terms of picking the right battles, which was your question, I would ask myself, is this topic something that will have an impact on my long-term success and long-term satisfaction? Because if the answer is yes, then you probably need to find a way to have the conversation. If the answer is no, it's something tactical, short-term, that is not that important, let it pass. Don't spend any energy on it.
And that's really great advice. And I'm going to ask you one last question, Susana, as we wrap up this podcast, because I feel like I could keep asking you questions all day. And I know we've got a limit on time. So we talked about the importance of communicating, and we've talked about having conversations and having more conversations when it's appropriate and we need to do them. What are your top tips for having good conversations and getting the results that you want from those conversations?
So top tips of conversations, first of all, is plan them. And I'm not talking a conversation over coffee. I'm talking about a conversation about a topic that is important to you. May that be because there's conflict, or because you want to ask for something, or because you want to influence others. We don't spend enough time planning the conversations. If you haven't ordered the ideas in your head in the first place, how can you hope to have a meaningful conversation with the other person? So first of all, plan the conversation. Think about, what are the key messages? What's important? What would I like to achieve with this conversation? Step number 2 is think about why is the situation of the other person going to be different, or why might they think differently to you? What is there a potential gap between your side and their side? And then once you've tried to look at that, ask that person to have that conversation and give them time to prepare. Don't just catch them on the spot. because they also need time to think about it. And then finally, just have that conversation, listen, adapt your position, because when you start listening to each other, you will change your mind about perhaps that idea that you first went on with, and let go of the result a little bit, like with the confidence, even if it goes pear-shaped. You've tried your best, you've planned, you've tried to be empathetic. The chances are it will go better than if you hadn't done all of these things. But if not, let it be. Don't try and control it. Sometimes I have conversations with people about, they will ask me, how can I get them to do what I want them to do? And I say, well, you can't. When you let go of trying to control the other person, you become more influential. It's the paradox. The less I try to force you, Hannah, into my way of thinking, and I simply express my view to you and I listen to you, the more likely you are to agree with me and come on my way. So it's almost relinquish control, and you're more likely to get your own way.
And that is a fabulous piece of advice to end this podcast on, Susana. And as always, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insights. And if our guests would like to learn more about you, perhaps learn more about your newest book, where can they find you?
It is very easy. Well, it's been my pleasure as well to talk about these topics with you, Hannah. My name is quite unusual, Susana Serrano-Davey. So if you put it in Google, you get lots of stuff from my website to podcasts and presentations. So alternatively, go to my website, which is serrano-davey, all one word, .com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Susana, and thank you to our listeners for joining us today. If you have some follow-up questions or some areas you'd like me to explore further, I'd love to hear from you. But other than that, I want to say a big thank you to Susana for joining me today, and thank you for listening to the CFO 4.0 podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Hannah, and thanks everyone.
Now, for the £1 million question. What is the best finance software for your business? Is it A, Sage 50? Is it B, Sage 200 Standard? C, Sage 200 Professional? Or D, Sage Intact? An impossible question to answer without a lifeline. But we have the perfect lifeline for you. Our free quiz, which Sage product is right for you? We'll tell you which product is the best fit for your business in just 5 minutes. All you need to do is head to www.itassolutions.co.uk and answer a few simple questions.